Today we are talking about a prequel that was filmed in secret right after the first movie was filmed. So I'd like to hear down in the comments your favorite movies that were shot back to back. They could be sequels, they could be kind of related. I'm thinking stuff like how Paul Morrissey made Blood for Dracula right after he made Flesh for Frankenstein. Hello, I'm Adam Caesar. This is Project Black T-Shirt, the channel where we take a new or a reissue movie or movies and then pair them with a reading recommendation, usually horror fiction, that you will enjoy if you like those movies. I am the author of the Bram Stoker award-winning teen slasher novel Clown in a Cornfield and its sequel, Clown in the Cornfield 2, which just came out in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook. These are sold wherever books are sold. Please go get them. I am also the writer of an upcoming Dark Horse comic, miniseries, called Dead Mall, with art by David Stahl and letters by Justin Birch. I'm really excited. I've talked about it elsewhere on the internet, but I don't actually think I've talked about it on this channel yet. If you're a comic book person, you know how to order comics. You have to go in to your local comic book store and you have to tell them, please add Dead Mall by Adam Caesar and David Stahl to my pull list. I really want to read this comic, and you gotta get stores excited about it, because launching a new comic, especially as someone who only has a very little amount of comic book experience, and this is my first creator-owned comic, yeah, please help me out and check it out. The pitch for Dead Mall was that it is The Ruins meets Nightbreed meets Chopping Mall. It is teenagers in a mall fighting monsters, and the twist is the entire comic book is narrated by the mall. The mall is actually an evil entity, the mall itself. All right. I'm back again very quickly after my last video because this is hot off the presses. I just last night went to a press screening of Pearl, the new film from Ty West, and then because it was later at night and my buddy and I, we were so filled with the spirit of horror films. He was like, he checked his watch and he checked his phone and he said, "You know what? If we run 10 blocks, we can probably make the 9:45 screening of Barbarian." I'm going to talk about both of them now, but I think they're very interesting to pair together. When I'm recording this, Pearl opens next week. Barbarian's already open. I would actually just, if you haven't seen Barbarian yet, I would just do what I did. Go see them back to back in the theater. I like both these movies, and we'll talk about why now. So I was on a bit of a reviewing hiatus when Ty West's X came out a few months ago, or almost a year ago now, I guess. Time's funny right now. I never really got to talk about it in any kind of length, and I'm not really going to now, other than to say I absolutely loved it. I think one of my favorite movies of the year, and it's, for those that don't know, X is a story set in the 1970s about a group of amateur filmmakers who are renting a farmhouse to go film a porno. And it's this slasher story that has a lot on its mind, and it has discussions of why we even enjoy film, and especially why we enjoy horror film, and it tells it through its kind of like sister genre in a weird way, because of the way independent filmmaking worked in the 70s. It was like, you're either making a porno or you're making a horror movie, and sometimes these creatives were going back and forth between them. So it had that backdrop, and it used it so effectively to form and function, talk about film without explicitly talking about film, even though half the time it was explicitly talking about film. I just thought it was genius. I love that movie. And then to talk about this new prequel, Pearl, which the trailer to Pearl, this movie was unannounced before X opened in theaters, and the trailer to Pearl was actually a post-credit sequence in X. I did not hear about that because I went to see X first day. I walked out of the theater and then immediately looked at my group chat, and my friends were like, "Did you stay through the credits?" And I was like, "No," but there was a trailer for the prequel. I don't usually talk spoilers on this channel, but to talk about both of these movies at any length at all, you're going to have to talk about some spoilers. I mean, the very existence of Pearl, if you haven't seen X yet, is a little bit of a spoiler, because X kind of hides who the killer is going to be exactly until this like kind of first act twist that is the first kill. So if you haven't seen X yet, but you've seen the trailer for Pearl, you know that Pearl is the killer. She is played by Mia Goth in both films. In X, she is under heavy makeup, heavy old person makeup. And Pearl, I was very surprised when the credits came up, and Mia Goth is credited with a screenplay credit as well. She's not only a producer on the film, she's the star of the film. and it's her and Ty West get writing credit for it. And this is Mia Goth's movie all the way. And X felt like that a little bit. It felt like a showcase kind of for her talent, but X felt like much more of an ensemble film. And I think Brittany Snow was fantastic in X, and all the Kid Cudi and all the supporting actors were really incredible in X. But Pearl, as the name implies, is much more Pearl's show and Pearl's story. It's very rare in horror films. I was talking about this with my buddy Scott when we were walking out. Like, it's very rare in horror films that the thing that you praise first is an actor's performance. And I think that's what everyone's going to be doing with Pearl. The story, very briefly, an origin story for better and for worse. It is Pearl in 1918. She is a young woman. Her husband, who she married and kind of married with the hopes that he would take her away from this kind of brutal farm existence that she doesn't enjoy, maybe to something a little more high class or a little bit more comfortable. He goes off to fight in World War I. She is left alone at this farm with her mother and her infirm father. And at the same time, there's this extra isolation of the Spanish flu pandemic is happening at the same time. So her mother's kind of keeping her in, and she wants to go to town. She wants to go see movies, early movies, kind of Ziegfeld Follies type dance movies. And she can't, and is not allowed to, and is very repressed. But at the same time, all this repression is happening. There are the seeds, the inkling that something's wrong with Pearl. There's something inside her that is malignant. We see her kill animals in the very beginning. We see the kind of telltale signs of maybe psychopathy or serial killer nature. And the whole movie is this kind of build up to, we know she's going to become a violent slasher killer at some point. What is going to be the thing that kind of sets her over the top? Her repression, not only like physical isolation and repression, but like sexual repression and this yearning for more, this yearning, the idea that she can be a star, she could be somebody with this early Hollywood, with seeing motion pictures. And she has like a fling with a projectionist. So there is, like in X, there's that layer of meta-text where it's a kind of a movie about movies, but less so here. It's one of many threads this movie touches on. And if I were going to criticize the film, I don't really want to, because I did enjoy it, but it's begging for comparisons to X, because it so was produced in lockstep. The movie has a bunch of nods to things that will come up later and happen later in the 1970s storyline that we saw in X. So the movie is constantly kind of reminding you of X, so it's begging those comparisons. And I wouldn't say problem with the movie, but when I walked out of X, I got it immediately. I felt what the themes and intent and all these motifs, and even though it was complex, and even though it had a lot going on and it had a lot to say, I kind of digested it and I got what it was saying. And in Pearl, there are all these different levels that Pearl is working on, which means that Mia Goth's performance as Pearl gets to be incredibly layered and interesting and nuanced, and this mix of like revulsion and pity and all these different things we feel about Pearl. She's able to kind of play us like a fiddle, even like laughter, because the movie, like X had a little bit of humor in it, or a little bit of comedy, a little bit of off-kilterness, and Pearl dials that way, way up, because it's a much more stylized film. It looks like, even though it's a movie talking about movies of 1918, where everything was full frame, silent, flickering light, the movie itself harkens to kind of like, it looks like Technicolor extravaganzas. It looks like East of Eden or Gone with the Wind or The Wizard of Oz, which it deliberately references more than a few times. Pearl is Dorothy in a way, or Pearl fashions herself as Dorothy, even though that film hasn't come out yet. Pearl fashions herself as Dorothy, like stuck in that opening part, stuck in that Kansas part, even though it's Texas, stuck in that black and white world, and she's yearning to break free. So there's all this different stuff going on, but it makes everything feel a little bit less focused. And because we have this powder keg construction of the story, it means we're a slow burn until she starts murdering folks. So there is that a little bit of almost patience testing quality to how this movie is put together. And none of that, again, none of that seems like a fault. None of that seems like it's not by design. It just means that you're constantly, during the movie and after the movie, I've been playing this game with myself of like, well, I loved X so much, and I really like this movie, but does this make X better or worse? Because there is that, like I said, that prequelness to it, where it's constantly setting things up and maybe even sometimes subverting your ideas of, oh, that's where that's going to come from in X. Like she's friends with the alligator from X. Seems like almost a kind of odd choice, and has, or at least an ancestor of that alligator, and has been feeding that alligator. I like it in the moment, but when you think about it, you're like, oh, it makes parts of X that seem so surprising, nuanced, and novel. You're seeing them again, so there's a little less novelty. Yeah, I really, really like the movie. If you enjoyed X at all, you're gonna want to go see it. It is that idea of like, well, now that I know what Pearl's deal is, are those like photos and that little bit of backstory that she delivers in X, does it enhance it, or does it conflict with some of it in a kind of emotional way? Because I didn't feel this, I won't feel the same way when I rewatch X. I think all of that will be resolved when I go back and watch X. And another thing, and because I'm recording this before this movie has released, and before I'm imagining there's going to be like press announcements and stuff like that, I know that Ty West, when he was doing press talking about X and Pearl after Pearl was announced, he had talked about the idea of his slasher trilogy, of doing a trilogy of films. So there is that implication that if he hasn't shot it already, like he shot this one kind of in secret, there will be a third one coming. And Pearl, as it is now, there's no post-credits scene in the press screening we saw. It leaves you at the end begging the question of like, well, how does this story continue? Is the third part in the trilogy, does it go between Pearl and X? Does it go after X? Does it go before Pearl, which would seem really hard to do? I'm just very interested in seeing if we're meant to take this almost as a complete whole. And it's that expectation setting of telling someone there's going to be a trilogy. It almost leaves you with more questions than answers towards the end in some ways. But in other ways, it completely explicates and explains to you what's going on with Pearl and what's going on with her mind and where she came from. A very interesting film, a very, very non-traditional slasher, where X felt like it did play group of people going to a location to be killed one by one. Plays completely fair with the slasher formula. I think Pearl takes some liberties with that kind of set structure. Really, go see it and decide for yourself and tell me if I'm full of crap in the comments. So after Pearl, we walked from the PFS Bourse to the AMC Fashion District here in Philadelphia, and we went and saw Barbarian. Now, this movie kind of seemingly came out of nowhere. It seemed like this might be my own detachment from the scene, but it seemed like 1 week ago, this movie either screened at some kind of festival and every horror person was talking about it, and I completely missed the boat and hadn't heard anything about it. I hadn't seen a poster, hadn't heard of a trailer. I don't watch trailers, but I haven't heard of a trailer. And there's no better way to release this movie, Barbarian, than to release it that way. When it was over, I turned to my friend Scott Cole, who has a new book out, Departures, wonderful book. I turned to Scott and I was like, who the hell is this? Who made this movie? This Zach Cregger. The name didn't immediately ring a bell. I had to look him up. It turns out that he has a comedy background. He's one of the sketch troupe, The Whitest Kids You Know, which I remember when The Whitest Kids You Know was around. I think I was in college, and I remember they had a bunch of sketches that were very funny, but not someone I had thought much about as a creative and a performer until this movie. And this is where I'll give you the complete spoiler. I know I did a spoiler warning up top, but you can't talk about Barbarian without spoiling some small aspect of it. And this is a movie that is incredibly your enjoyment of it probably is incredibly contingent on not knowing what the Act 1 break, what the Act 2 break, and what the ending is. I loved this movie, and I know that 3/4 of you watching this video will love this movie, and 1/4 of you will probably vociferously hate this movie. But I'm just gonna say, if you're at all interested in seeing it, if what I've said so far is interesting to you or is piqued your interest, don't watch me talk about this movie. Probably bad for YouTube analytics to tell you to stop watching, but skip to the end for the book recommendation. But just go see Barbarian. With that said, we open on a woman rolling up to an Airbnb. She's in a suburb of Detroit, or a part of Detroit. I'm not actually sure. I'm not from Michigan. And she knocks on the door, and the key's not in the lockbox. And immediately you're tense. You're immediately like, this is uncomfortable, because if you've ever rented an Airbnb, you kind of know how weird that exchange is, that handoff. There's all these rules, and she already, things are going wrong because she's already stressed, and she's either running away from a relationship, we don't quite know right off the bat. She's in a high stress situation, and she can't find this key to get in this house, and it's at night and it's raining, and then she sees like movement in the house, and we realize that there's someone else in the house, and knocks on the door. It's Bill Skarsgård, who is kind of notorious for these menacing roles. He's like this modern day Peter Lorre in a way, like a tall and thin Peter Lorre. They get in this uneasy, like he says he booked it on HomeAway, and she says she booked it on Airbnb, and you're immediately just trying to figure out, if you haven't had this movie spoiled for you and you don't know what the conceit is, you're immediately like, what the hell is going on here? Who is lying to who? What's going on? And you're trying to just kind of worry it out, like something terrible is going to happen in this opening scene. And it finally does at a certain point, but it's hands down, it's not going to be what you're expecting. As she is lured deeper into this Airbnb, and we realize that even the whole town, it's not just like the neighbors are not home. It is, when she sees it in the light of day, it is this completely abandoned place with this one perfectly little well-kept house. So our protagonist, Jess, is played by Georgina Campbell. She's wonderful in the movie. I haven't seen a lot of her. There's Bill Skarsgård, and then our third character that comes into here is played by Justin Long, who Justin Long has had a long and interesting career, and I feel like because of the kind of horror fan, the age of horror fan I feel like recognize him from the Jeepers Creepers films, recognize him from his like kind of comedy teen movie work, and now that he's a little bit older, this is like a career best performance from him. He's playing an absolute scumbag, and his character is really indicative of why I think the whole movie works. If you look at the Justin Long character, he is an actor who has faced very serious allegations from one of his female co-stars, and there's a little bit of like, did he do it? Did he not do it? And even if he didn't do it, he's such a scumbag. You would have that character in another movie in a less, I talked about that tension building and that control and that power of the direction and misdirection of this movie. Like if you had that character in a different movie, or in a movie that's not as well directed or not as well made, even with this same script, Cregger wrote and directed the movie. It's a great script, but even that script directed by someone less talented, or someone giving less of a crap, or someone like if it were some quickie streamer movie with a little less money behind it and a little less polish behind it, this movie would not work. And this is a movie that I think is fantastic and does work, but it only works zooming in on that Justin Long character. A lesser movie would make them almost like a complete joke and a complete person you can't wait to see his comeuppance. We wouldn't handle these characters with the care that we do, and give them this weird, even though the movie is completely sadistic and the movie is completely no holds barred and really exploitative and really crass and weird at times, it does treat these characters with a certain modicum of like humanity, and that drives the whole thing forward. It's even our villains, once we meet our villains that aren't the obvious villains, it treats them with a weird amount of respect and humanity too. Yeah, if one little thing was off about this movie, like if if the tone, where this movie is, again, kind of a spoiler to say because it doesn't start being funny until like the half-hour mark, but this movie's pretty freaking funny. Like, this is not a horror comedy, but anyone else making this movie might have, or any lesser director or filmmaker making this script might have turned this into just a horror comedy, which might have been okay, might have had some laughs, but would have been the kind of movie where I would have watched it and been like, I'm not making a video about this because I don't have enough nice things to say about this movie. That's the kind of movie this is, where if one little ingredient was off in the stew, you would have had to throw the whole batch out. I loved it. I think both of these movies are worth seeing, and I think if you're going next Thursday or Friday, once Pearl's open, if you're going to go spend a day at the movie theaters, I would see both of them if I were you. But if you just had to see one, I would say see Barbarian because by the time it comes out and by the time people start talking about it, you're going to know too much of what happens in it for the surprises to really work. That being said, this week's book recommendation is a book I've talked about before. I think I talked about it on one of my like list videos. I don't know that I talked about it in depth, but this is Brother by Anya Alborn. I've seen this book a lot because I've started to do TikTok and I'm starting to be on TikTok. I feel like this book does really well. People know about this book, so pardon this recommendation if you've already read this book or already heard of this book. But Brother by Anya Alborn is a kind of coming-of-age version of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Only the perspective is not the victims, it is one of the family members themselves. So we have this, our protagonist, and it's been a very long time since I've read it, but he is this kind of helper to Leatherface. It's almost as if like the hitchhiker from Texas Chainsaw Massacre were like the protagonist of the movie, and he's like wanting to get out of being in this cannibalistic murder family. And he's like met a girl and the girl is going to be like killed and he doesn't want that to happen. So it has a lot of kind of parallels with both Pearl and Barbarian, which is why I'm choosing it. Familial horror, and is this character a complete bad scumbag character? Is it nature, nurture? Is it all these different issues are brought up in Anya Alborn's Brother? So if you go see both of these movies this weekend and then you want something to read after you've seen them and continue that and make it a triple feature, I would highly, highly, highly recommend Anya Alborn's Brother. Please go buy Clown in the Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives. If you've bought that, if you've read that, if you've reviewed it on Amazon and Goodreads and you told all your friends about it, then go to the comic book store and tell them you want Dead Mall, issue number 1, and then they should pull the rest of the series because we're doing some really great stuff in this comic and I can't wait for you to read it. All right, I'll see you next week with some Halloween cheer.